Dan, thank you for joining the JumpSearch Talent Show. I appreciate you being here and spending some time with me. For the audience out there, Daniel Nestle is an award-winning communications executive, podcast host, leading voice in the intersection of AI and strategic communications. As a founder of Inquisitive Communications and host of Trending Communicator podcast, Dan helps brands and leaders reimagine content strategy using generative AI and human-centric storytelling. With decades of experience leading marketing and communications at companies like Mitsubishi, LIXIL, and Edelman, Dan now partners with executives to build AI-powered content engines that elevate thought leadership, streamline workflows, clarify the positioning in the noisy world. Twice named to the PR Dashboard 25 and recognized by Propel 100 in 2025, Dan brings a rare blend of curiosity, creativity, and practical systems thinking to every conversation. Daniel, welcome. I'm really excited to have a chat with you here and dig deeper into what a lot of this means and what you're working on. Welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you so much. And what a great intro. I mean, it's really hard to live up to the hype when you're positioned as this person who lives at the nexus or the crossroads or the strategic leadership position of XYZ, right? But I'm excited to be part of this whole AI communications and content creation world, and I'm happy to talk to you about it and have to talk to anybody about it. And I hope we all have a great conversation and our listeners have a good come away with some really good takeaways.
Yeah, it's an interesting time right now because I think that obviously you've had a tremendous career in terms of PR communications, and now you're leveraging that domain expertise, coupling with AI, and I think it's an amazing time right now because AI is just changing a lot of things, and it's prompting us to really ask ourselves so much about who we are, what we do, what our purpose is, how we contribute and add value, and it's just a moving target right now. And so I appreciate what you do and would love to dig in to better understand what you do and how you do it and what some folks can walk away with, especially myself, as we look to figure out which way is up.
Well, my pleasure to talk about any of that and all of it. And in the space of a podcast, it's like, what do we talk about first and where do we focus? Because as everybody probably knows and is maybe even tired of hearing, that AI is such a game changer and a disruptor and a malevolent or a benevolent force, depends on where you come from.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that in my, you mentioned that I've had this long career in domain expertise, but in the world of AI, we're all newbies, right? And
yeah,
it's just a matter of how and where you focus and where you've played around and experimented to the point that you discover how it unlocks various paths for you. And my career was all through corporate communications and agency and everything. And I would most likely not be out on my own consulting and doing, building my own business if it weren't for what I've learned over the last 2 years. And it's only been 2 years really with AI and the benefits, the kind of extra capabilities that it provides me to be able to do all these things.
Dan, talk to me a little bit about, just to set the stage a little bit in terms of the context of your background. It sounds like you've worked in large corporate environments. Can you just kind of walk us through kind of your career trajectory, particularly working with large organizations, small organizations, startups, going out on your own? What did that look like? And just the reason behind the question is there's a lot of folks right now that have been, for example, you two for the past 20, 25 years, right? Full-time position. Now, I think there's a trend where folks are moving away from W-2 or strict W-2 to sort of multi-revenue opportunities. And I'm curious to learn a little bit more about your trend, your trajectory in corporate, startup, entrepreneur, and kind of where you are today.
Yeah, it's part of that's a reflection of, I think, where we are generationally. I'm a Gen Xer and I've been through the ups and downs of economies and of new technologies. Every new technology that's come out, I've been right at the beginning of it, me and my cohorts, I suppose. And I think that's shaped a lot of how we've approached our careers. And in my case, the way it sort of rolled out was I didn't, like many people, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And in some ways I still don't. And, so I left college and I traveled to Japan to just teach English and figure out what's what, and maybe come back to grad school like all the people I knew, spend a year or two in Japan maybe, and then, take that as a really awesome resume stuffer to do whatever comes next, But that 1 year turned into 16, and I ended up being in Japan for a really long time. And I found that I needed the discovery of myself and of kind of the things that I liked in order to really get an understanding of what I like to do for work, right? So both of those things have to happen. And for me, I think it was a slower path. But that said, I just started out teaching. I moved on into a for-profit educational company for a little while in Japan. Just got a sense of business, understood a lot more about, get my language skills up, and then eventually moved into recruiting. I think that's sort of where we had that commonality. Recruiting was really cool because it gave me insight into companies and into the kinds of skill sets people need to really get on in their careers. At least that time, and I was focused in Japan, of course. But the basics are the same. And recruiting led me into I realized that sometimes you got to do things to discover what you don't want to do.
Yeah.
I discovered, I really didn't really love sales that much. And I really liked the more cerebral part of it. So I started to get into writing and content, but I didn't know that that's what it was at the time. Changed a couple of jobs, ended up after a couple of years in recruiting, ended up working for PwC Consulting. So I thought I made it to the big house, like, okay, now finally have a marquee brand that I can put on my resume and then come back, that's it. My life is set. But PwC, it was a really awful experience because there's a lot of job seekers and people who are listening who are in the career process. You might identify, you take a role and then the role that you end up doing is not the role that is promised or that you sign up for. But in my case, it was because it sort of coincided with the 9/11 attacks in New York and changed the whole. I was in charge of staffing international projects, and that all stopped all of a sudden. There were no more international projects all of a sudden, so I had to kind of think about how to reinvent myself. And the only thing that I knew how to do, or that I thought I knew how to do anyway, was write and communicate. So I started my own business back then, like right after 9/11, really, and got off of the equivalent of the W-2 path. In Japan, it's something different, but the same thing. I was a company guy. And I started just telling people I was a copywriter. I started an LLC, business cards printed up, said I was a copywriter because business cards were and still are, by the way, important in Japan. I started going to these networking events and just handing out my card and saying, yeah, I'm a copywriter. I'm an expert in this and that. And it wasn't really fake it till you make it. It was more like act as if, and I was acting as if I was a really established copywriter. Some people believed me. And I got some work, and luckily I could live up to the bar that I set for myself. So I built a little bit of a business for a couple of years doing copywriting that evolved into, you got to understand also the time. It was like when websites were starting to be built out for more than just, basic like information sheets. Like websites were starting to become functional. Companies started to understand that they needed they needed more kind of deeper in the funnel content on their websites, and they needed writers to do that. So I started doing that, building websites, putting these projects together, hooked up with a couple of PR people. So before I knew it, I'm doing marketing and PR. And I didn't realize that that was the path I was on, but I was on this marketing PR path. And I'll try to shorten the story now, because what happened at the end, like after doing that for 4 years, my biggest client essentially basically hired me full time. So I closed down my company, went back into the corporate world. And then I spent the next, 15 or I guess almost 20 years, right? Working for different corporations in marketing and communications. And that's where I really had a career trajectory. I started off as a marketing PR manager, moved into a senior comms manager, and then into and in between, of course, I'm moving from Japan, then to Australia, then back to the States, and for different companies. Eventually ended up as a VP of marketing and comms for one of the Mitsubishi companies here in the US, and then the SVP of comms for Lixil, another big Japanese company here in the US. And that was just a couple of years ago. Then AI happened, and the pandemic happened, and AI happened, and all these things happened. One thing I've learned about myself over the last 20 years is that I have a short attention span and very low tolerance for boredom. I start predictably in every situation I'm in. I'm always looking for not the next job, but the next technology or the next way to do my work in a more exciting and interesting way. So I naturally gravitated toward technology along the way. In parallel to building my career, I also started to get involved with professional organizations and my own kind of fun and excitement, home experimentation with various tools. So when AI dropped a couple of years back, in November of 2022. I mean, I was ready, and it was an eye opener. I immediately knew that this was going to change everything. Dove into it, probably too far, definitely too far ahead of where my company at the time wanted to be. Eventually, when the economy turned and the company I was working for, Lixil, needed to make some changes, there was restructuring around the world, and who needs a senior comms guy when there's not a lot to communicate? You got to focus in on the business. So, we parted ways very amicably, but that was exactly a year ago almost. And by that point, though, I was like full on the AI track because of the AI. And, we'll talk about it, but because of the various things I knew that I could do with AI, I was far more confident in starting my own business at that time.
Yeah.
Like I knew that not only did I know how to use AI to create interesting content and do all different kinds of fun things, and important business things, but I knew that I could have at my fingertips for a very low cost a suite of tools that would effectively help me run my business without having to hire anybody. I think that's dawning on a lot of people, and that's one of the reasons why you're seeing this kind of move from the W-2s to the 1099s, or to the to people who are out there doing consulting, because they know that they have a support system that they didn't have before. So that's a very long story. There's of course a lot more to it, but I'm happy to talk about any or all of it, and any or all part of it. But let's dig into where you want to go.
Yeah. So I'm curious to learn a little bit more about like communications. Like, what does that mean historically, and how do you see that evolving as a function of AI?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because the communications world, as we see it, means very different things from people who are inside it to the people who are outside it, right? So in corporate communications and in like the agencies and in that kind of the professional world of strategic communications, we're all about, if you think about it from in a marketing and communications kind of continuum, the communications part of it is essentially the top of the funnel, the way that you tell your story as a company or as an individual, the way that you communicate or talk about or tell stories or write about the products that you have, et cetera, that are not for advertising, but really for part of when you're communicating to various stakeholders, you're talking to various stakeholders that aren't necessarily your end customers, right? You have to, that includes your employees. So the way that you reach out and touch all those touch points, whether it's through written communication or it's through video or podcast or whatever, the content that you create serves as the vehicle for messages and for your narrative across all those different stakeholder groups. There's within the comms world, we have, of course, and I'll get to the one that most people think of last, but I mentioned internal communications. There's also like investor relations, there's government relations, there's public affairs, which can consume or can include government relations. There's executive communications, crisis communications, and that, which is another big area. Whenever your company or you get in trouble, you got to figure out how to get in front of it and be able to talk about it. There's executive positioning. There is so much there, and internal advisory. Talking about how to approach different how to translate strategy into marketing and into words that your employees and your stakeholders understand. So you have to be part of really plugged into the management team. But the big thing that people think of when they think of communications is, and I said I'd save it for last, is PR, media relations, right? People think of PR as comms. PR is like essentially earned media, going out there and getting your name out there in whatever newspaper. Do we have those anymore? In top tier media and second tier media out there, like going out there and getting people interested in you, in the story that you have to tell, and willing to interview you or write your story or publish your story for you, essentially for free, because it's earned.
How is PR different from copy or writing or advertising? How is it different? I know the audiences might be slightly different.
Yeah.
Or completely different. But how is it different?
It really depends on which audience you're reaching, how you're and the way that you have to kind of the tools and the methods that you would use to achieve the action that you're trying to achieve. In other words, when you're copywriting for like an ad, there's a call to action in that ad. It's pretty straightforward. It's like, here's a product. This is why it's wonderful. click here to buy it. All right. So, which by the way is a terrible ad. But anyway, you have this, you have the structure, you have an advertisement, or if it's a video or if it's a story, whatever. The point is to get somebody to take an action that is in the buying cycle when you're really thinking about advertising or marketing. And you're often paying for that. You're paying for ad space. You're paying for, you're paying for appearances. You're paying for the ability to reach audiences that don't normally reach, because you want to get out there to the segments that you've identified and kind of bring in new customers. With PR and communications, you're looking at the earned media part of everything. So if you think of content or the way that you distribute your message and your content, my friend Gina Dietrich created this model. It's the best way to understand it. Think of it in terms of something she calls the PESO model, PESO. There's paid, earned, shared, and owned. Okay. So those are the four ways, like broad brush, that you are able, those are the four types of content that you have out there. Paid is what marketing generally does, although PR does touch on it. Earned is where you're looking at the kind of the most of the PR work. That means having other people write your stuff for you, right? Essentially. So you're not writing the work. You have a story to tell. You have messages. You have a new development. You've got a brand new kind of groundbreaking breakthrough that you need to share with the world.
Examples of that could be like, I don't know, magazine or news articles.
For sure. But the idea is that you're not writing the article, is that you're reaching out to the journalists or to the publications and getting them interested in your story. So the PR professional will write or call, or, they'll construct a pitch for the person. So it's a little bit like recruiting in that you have to pitch a candidate to a company, right? In this case, you're pitching a story to a journalist. So the pitch is part of it. Then there's also the more methodical and systematic. This is kind of what I like to think is the future, the systematic approach, which is you build your own reputation, you create your own owned content. And that's the O part of the PESO model, right? You build that owned content, which is your website, your blogs, your videos, your podcasts, whatever it is. Build that up, make sure that you have a strong point of view that's unique and that is at least demonstrably compelling, and build your audience organically such that over time you are known in your space. And the media will reach out to you to cover your stories. And that's where your owned becomes the earned part of things, right? So by virtue of building up expertise, you don't have to do the pitching. It just happens. You and I know this. We're on podcasts, right? I mean, I don't have to pitch myself for podcasts, because podcasters are what I think are like the new wave of media, or like one of the newer waves of this kind of earned media side of things, where there's a couple million podcasts out there right now, but it's not the same thing as pitching a reporter. A podcaster has a very fixed number of shows they're going to do. If you fit into their kind of theme, then generally you can connect with them and pitch them like a person. Or you'll be found and discovered. It's a very fluid and more organic world than traditional media relations. It's not to say that you can't take advantage of like tools to pitch yourself, but it's much more personal and I think segmented in a lot of ways.
So everything you described there, I could see how that maps to sort of a very structured corporate or company sort of organization. How does that translate to that solopreneur? Right? Because when you're talking about having folks, maybe third parties, write or tell your story, the immediate thought that came to my mind was for that small SMB or solopreneur, for example, where people are writing reviews about that company,
for sure,
that organization, right? Anyway, how does that map to sort of a smaller SMB or startup or solopreneur?
Reviews are a great example, by the way, of earned attention, earned media. And I like to think of it for SMBs, but actually even for big companies, they should stop thinking about earned media and start thinking about this in terms of earning attention. Anybody can earn attention. You just have to be able to do it in the right space and in the right place and at the right pace. The small business owner, and of whom I'm one, right, and the SMB and the I guess the solopreneur and the consultants out there, their biggest opportunity is in content differentiation and taking advantage of the channels that are out there to reach the highly, let's call it highly targeted channels that are available to them to reach their audiences. it's not like it used to be where you can suddenly be on LinkedIn or something and, you're going to reach 1 million people and, that's it. The world is fractured. The audiences are fractured. So you have to do more work. You have to put more work into getting the content out there. But for somebody who's not going to be like getting that story in the, in whatever top tier media, or who's not going to be like going out there and trying to get media attention. And by the way, almost anybody listening to this show, I think if you're trying to chase media placements, you're wasting your money and your time because of almost something that Eric said. Like, there's really no way really for an SMB or for a solopreneur or something to like suddenly get into the New York Times. Right. Unless you know somebody or you actually do something that is astoundingly newsworthy. A lot of organizations spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes even on a monthly basis, to try to get them into those media, and you're competing with that. So just forget it. Take your money, take your time, and do what works, which is build your own media, build your website, your blogs, establish a solid presence across social media, especially if you're in the B2B space, especially on LinkedIn. But not only on LinkedIn. Email is the best channel that you might have available to you, especially once you have a somewhat of an audience. Don't forget about email marketing. What my friend Robbie I'm sorry, I just forgot Robbie's last name, but Robbie calls the cockroach of marketing. It just won't die. It's going to be with us forever. Email marketing, absolutely. And then there are like email enablers like Substack, and even LinkedIn newsletters that you can do for free that will email people who are on your list or who subscribe to you. This is all organic. You can, of course, try to run ads, do a little bit of paid to amplify your message and try to, reach new audiences and get more subscribers or get more of this. But even on an organic level, if you're a manufacturer of of servo motors or something in the middle of Indiana, it's not incredibly important to you probably to be reaching, real estate agents in New York, right? You have to focus in on what's important to you. So your servo motor company is concerned with certain developments in the industry. We have an economy that the commerce is not localized, even if your business is. So by building out your own content, becoming experts in servo motors that everybody understands, people who are interested in that from far and wide will be able to find you. And it just happens slowly and over time with consistency and great content.
Yeah.
So anybody can do it is a silly thing to say. It takes focus, attention, and it takes a lot of content, I think, to do it right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of, let's say, as an example, a senior executive that has deep domain expertise, industry expertise. Maybe they've been W2 or series of W2 over the past 15, 20, 25 years. And they've always relied on, just sort of referrals for, finding their next opportunities. And let's say this person wants to go out and really build out their own personal brand, right? How would you guide them in terms of starting with evaluating and crafting their message? Because it feels like you have to go through that exercise first, or at least to some degree, before you start looking at these different channels of PR and communications and branding. And how would you guide that person to sort of find their message?
Well, there's a lot of self-examination and introspection that has to happen here. I mean, if you've been an executive, and you're describing me in some ways, because that was me as a senior executive, and going out on my own. Building a personal brand is not just something you should do. It's an absolute requirement, I think, as a solopreneur, certainly a small business operator, even as a CEO of a small company, I think you need a personal brand. Even if you identify with the corporate brand, you still more and more going to need a personal one. But for those of us out there who are the kind of person you described, Eric, it takes some introspection first, where you need to kind of understand not just what you can do, but what you can do, how you think about that, whatever it is that you can do. What need does it serve? Which audiences does it reach? And can you keep doing that? Because sometimes you may think if your personal brand is something really unique and you're really passionate about it. I could think of an example, I guess, like, let's say you are I'll use a friend of mine is a expert in traditional Japanese paper making. Okay. Traditional Japanese paper making. Her personal brand, I suppose, is about traditional Japanese paper making. But, the audience for traditional Japanese paper making is quite small, it's not the kind of thing that she can make a living off of, building a personal brand digitally about paper making.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I may not be seeing all the angles here, but for most of us, right, we're knowledge workers. You have expertise in certain areas. You want to become a domain expert, or even if you are a domain expert in, let's just say, marketing or communications, for example, you're going to look out there and you go, geez, there's so many people who are experts in this and who are like pushing themselves as, oh, this is the person who is like like me, AI and communications, the future of communications. I'm not the only person who does this.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like I do it well, and I do have my own unique take on things, but that unique take on things is more connected to my own voice, my own kind of way of talking about things than the subject matter material itself. I mean, I definitely come up with insights and ideas that other people may not, or that, are unique enough to attract some attention. But generally speaking, my personal brand is about AI communications, future of AI and communications, and helping people to kind of grasp that. It's a sustainable interest. That's the point, right? It is something that I know has shelf life that is going to allow me to continue to do work in this space that I know it's going to be changing, and it's going to kind of expand into the future. And there's always going to be something for me to offer the people who care about me, or the audiences I care about. I'll be able to give them information or advice in a way that's needed. So your first step is to figure out what is that for you? And I highly recommend going through Mark Schaefer's book, Known, Known.
Okay.
And he provides, I think, the best blueprint for developing your personal brand. So, there's exercises there, everything, you really should be doing work on this. The second part of it is to give yourself time. So you kind of discover what you want to do, but building a personal brand takes a lot of time. Every expert I've heard on this topic, they always kind of end up with this number. It's funny. I don't think it's scientific, but everybody kind of ends up here. It's 18 months. 18 months. Give yourself 18 months of consistent personal branding. That means consistent content creation, and distribution, like on a whatever basis you set. Once a week, twice a week, no less than once a week, consistently over 18 months. Stay on target, stay on course to build your personal brand. A lot of people, in fact, most of us, do not have the time or patience for that and quit too early.
Yeah. There's a consistency component to that. That
exactly.
One thing that comes to mind is there's a lot of folks right now that are transitioning from their roles to maybe another position, and they've been out of work and they're looking for the next position. And historically, a lot of folks jump from one job to the next. And it's between those two jobs where they'll really focus on their branding, or also known as brushing up or sprucing up their resume and their LinkedIn profile.
The transition period.
Yeah.
In transition.
But then once they land their new position, all the effort that they're putting into sort of personal branding, content creation, it just kind of goes by the wayside. And 4 years later, when they're looking for their next position, then there's a bit of a surge to like, oh, I got to sort of brand myself. I got to put myself out there. And I think it sounds like what you're advocating for is more of a sustained activity as far as personal branding.
Sure. If you really know that you're onto something, and if you're passionate but practically passionate, I'll say, about your brand, like, that this is something that people want and people need. You really think that you're offering something that is going to help them, or going to fill that kind of gap, or kind of get through the seam that you see in the future. There are ways to continue to do that even while you're working. In my case, I've been building my personal brand for a few years now. But I can argue that I've been doing it for 5 years. I just didn't get the focus that I needed until about 2 years ago. But I had started with my podcast, and I could do that while I was working. Anybody can write a blog, while you're working. If it's something that you think is sustainable and that you really think is important, then keep doing it even while you're working. But I'm not going to fault anyone for saying, oh, you know what? I got a great new job. I don't have time to do this anymore. I'm just going to focus on my brand, on my company brand. That's perfectly great. I mean, you have either a family to support, or you have your own career that you want to kind of get ahead in. There's no value judgment here. Like, sometimes that's a great path. Yeah. I'll just qualify that by saying, but if you were onto something, if your personal brand or the thing that you were developing wasn't just, okay, this is how I'm going to make money in the short term, so I have to do this, was more of a kind of driven by a mission, driven by value, driven by purpose. Then try to keep it going in some way even while you're working. Don't let it die. Although, you get too busy and you might let it go dormant for a little while, but keep breathing life back into it. The great thing about building your personal brand while you are also working is that 18-month number I mentioned before. It's still an important one. That may become 36 months, right?
Yeah.
It may stretch. You may not be able to be as consistent. If you're onto something and your audiences care about you, you can stay present and you can stay involved in the topic area, stay on top of things, just enough to be a caretaker for your brand until you're ready to kind of put more life into it again at some point in the future.
Yeah. Dan,
but don't let it die.
For somebody that's, let's say they're gainfully employed and they're fairly busy. What are the minimum few things that person should be doing to maintain their brand, so to speak? Is it posting on LinkedIn once a week? Is it, having a newsletter or an emailing list?
Yeah.
What's the minimum that you think people should be doing just to kind of keep it alive, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, if you're working full time, they say necessity is the mother of invention. So you don't necessarily feel that instant that straight in your face motivation to get your content out there all the time. But I'd say it's this is a very terrible answer. It depends is the answer. But I think at a minimum, like if you are a knowledge worker and you're in, you're in a you're in an area of the economy where technology is important, whether it's as an enabler or something that you're actually working on, then be present on LinkedIn. Try to post once a week, comment a couple times a week. Just keep that going. It's not that much of a lift. Suggesting that somebody keep a blog going or keep a podcast going or keep do their video project. I would say, of course, you should keep doing those things. Do whatever you can to keep it going within the realm of possibility. It depends on how busy you are at your job and where your priorities are. But do what you can is the answer.
Yeah.
But keep it going.
One thing I've noticed with some of these content creators, particularly with the content creators that are a little bit more technical, that might be providing insights into, I don't know, how you write a prompt or how you create an agent on XYZ platform. One thing that I've noticed is that a lot of these folks, and it's coming across as very authentic and very genuine, they're just firing up Loom and actually just recording the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
And then they're putting that out there as content. So it's a lightweight way of documenting their journey. And I think it does take a little bit of courage to kind of be that transparent with what you're doing and to, not edit out all the mistakes that are being made and the fumbling with this or that. But I think there's benefit because it comes across as really genuine and it's already integrated and, you're already doing the work. It's just, you're flipping on Zoom now and then maybe you have some sort of automated process for, maybe tightening up the cadence of the video or whatnot. But I've noticed that people are doing that and it's attracting a following and it's integrated in the work they're already doing.
I really envy those people who they can just switch on Loom or Camtasia or whatever tool they're using to record their screen and just this is the work I'm doing anyway. I'm going to narrate and goes out there. They chop it up with use Opus Clip, put it out there on TikTok or on Instagram. They're getting 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 views just on, hey, this is how you write a prompt. Good for them. I think it's fantastic. As long as it's legit, as long as what they're doing is actually helpful, I'm fine. But there's a lot of people who are doing that aren't helpful, I think, to many of us. But, look, if they see an opening, they're taking it. And I admire their business sense. But for people who are turning on the Loom and doing content creation, wonderful. You raise a really important point. And that is that content doesn't have to be highly polished. It's, it just needs to be genuine. It's more important when you're writing to get the writing to be a little bit more polished, but it still doesn't have to be perfect, right?
Yeah.
But video, audio, people want to see humans and they want to, even now more than ever, they want to see humans and they want to understand that humans are going to say things like, right. And people are going to flub their videos. And, I do it all the time. I found that my audiences actually like it when I make mistakes more than when I edit for clarity. So they feel relatable. They can relate to it more. And that's an important thing.
Yeah. Dan, let's talk a little bit about content engines. I know this is
Yeah.
something you and I had talked about. And first of all, what is a content engine, and what's the benefit or the sort of the significance of that, and how could that be used by folks in our audience?
Right. Now, this is my jam because this is 90% of what I'm working on these days
Yeah.
is building out, and we can call it a content engine for executives, small business owners, founders, for content creators. What I'm doing is more for people who already have a body of content. Okay. So like my stuff is really geared towards taking people who, they may have built a personal brand, or they may have one, or they may be working on it, but they have the raw material to make it happen. Right. So the stuff I'm doing is really it's actually quite involved and complex. But the concept behind everything, which is to create your own engine to generate content on your behalf, I think is one way that any of us can deal with what we talked about before, this fractured audience environment, the constant pressure to create more content, the time crunch that we're under, and of course the expense, because you don't have to hire anybody to create content if you have your own engine. And I call it, I'm not the only person who calls it an engine. Of course, some people say, oh, you're just creating a bot. Like if it's Eric, I'll create an Eric bot. And Eric bot, well, you can go to Eric bot and create content on behalf of Eric. Okay, fine. That's one way of looking at one instance of what an engine can be. But the way I would advise anybody doing this, and the way I do it for people, is to be very, very deliberate and thoughtful and accurate about what you're putting into the engine. So the engine itself generates the content. And we can stop when you think engine, I'm talking about either it's Claude or it's ChatGPT or something like this. That's
Okay.
the front end, right? So you're working with Claude or you're working with ChatGPT or something, and that's where you're going to run the engine. But it's how you fuel it and what's behind all that matters. And if you have content that's your own writing, your presentations, videos of yourself, videos of you on other people's podcasts, or articles about you, anything that you've written. I have a podcast, so it's great. My own podcast episodes become fuel for my engine.
Yeah.
Anything that you have. Obviously, people who've been doing this for a long time have a lot of really good stuff to put into the engine, right? So basically, you're building this, you're putting all of this information that's already yours. It is your stuff. It's your knowledge. It's your IP. That's what the engine uses to create new content. So, you're not using AI to create out of whole cloth. Let's put it that way. You're not using AI to fabricate some expertise that you don't have. Anybody can ask you, hey, Eric, I need an article on the migration patterns of narwhals in the Arctic Circle. Can you write one for me? Of course you can write one, because you can just go to ChatGPT and write it and get it done. It's not going to be you or authentically or sound like you. I would call that unethical, because you're misrepresenting your expertise. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if somebody says, we really want an expert opinion about recruitment, the kind of things that you've done in your life, Eric, can you create a point of view piece, or can we get a byline from you? Look, can you just write a LinkedIn post about it? Yeah. Then of course you're in your right mind, but how much time do you have to do those things? So if you have the engine, you say, of course I can do this for you. You go to your engine, you generate the content. If it's set up properly, you'll get great content in a few seconds, and then you'll take an hour to massage it and make it your own, right? Maybe you'll only, if you use my engine, you only need 10 minutes to massage it, because it'll be that good when it comes out of the end. But, for most people, you create your own content with AI, you still need to spend some time editing,
Yeah. How much,
but yeah.
Dan, so how much, let's say original written content would be, like, what's that threshold for the engine to be effective? Like if I just have, 5 blog articles that I wrote over the past 10 years, like, is that adequate, or do I need something more than that?
Okay. This is a really good question, because the answer is nobody really knows, but, there is a diminishing returns thing once you get a lot of content in there. I would say you need at least 3 to 5 writing samples and 3 to 5 voice conversational samples. And that's all. As long as they're in, they should have a little substance to them. So not just like you speaking one sentence or writing one sentence, like let's say 3 to 5 paragraphs of your writing in different ways. That's enough to create, to use AI to create work in your style. Okay. So
Okay.
that's all you need for right. I mean, the more you have, the more accurate it's going to be, of course. So like if you only have 3 pieces of writing and you're like, hey, base, can you generate stuff? Here's 3 pieces of Eric's writing. It'll write like you, like those 3 pieces, but you'll have to do a lot more editing, because it's not going to be
Okay.
perfect. However, it's really the knowledge base that matters the most. So training it in the style is in some ways the hardest part to get right, to make it sound really more, to sound like you.
Mm-hmm.
But for it to be using your knowledge, for it to be generating a point of view that really accurately reflects your thinking, you need to really fill it up with as much as you can of your thinking. So, it's not so much a number, it's more of what accurately represents you. So if you've done a research paper and that's everything, well, that's good enough, right?
Yeah.
Or if you have a framework that you've developed for your business and it's extensive enough, or there's enough information about it, and that's all you want to be known for, well, that's fine. But the more you have as a knowledge base, the better. And, there's various ways to cut that up and use it and process it. I like to drop it all into Notebook LM first.
Yeah.
So I use Notebook LM as my primary kind of repository for content, but I don't generate content from Notebook LM. I use that as a research tool to mine the content for things. I also use deep research tools like Google and Gemini Deep Research and Perplexity to do extra research that might be complementary to what I'm trying to do.
So you found Perplexity to be a strong research tool.
I think Gemini Deep Research is better for me, anyway, for what I'm doing. Okay. But people do love Perplexity. As of the time of this recording, Perplexity just launched their new model, which is like $200 a month, and I'm not doing that. But Perplexity is quite good. I mean, it is really good. Don't get me wrong. I just prefer the Gemini Deep Research for the kind of things that I'm looking at.
Okay. And then as far as like, I guess writing, do you find, between Claude or ChatGPT, do you have a preference there?
I prefer Claude, hands down.
Yeah.
Especially for nuanced writing and for substantive writing. This is why I use Claude for the front end of my engine, because it just, first of all, you can train it better in your styles.
Yeah.
But second of all, it's just better at writing, like full stop. It's a better writer. Now, ChatGPT, I've created a version of my own engine for ChatGPT too, and it's more chatty and it's kind of more interactive. It's a little more fun to play with, and it goes in different directions. It feels more like a bot, and it does create decent content, but I find it to be better with shorter content than it is with longer content. So if I'm going to do if you can do a LinkedIn post or something, then it's 6 in one hand, half dozen in another. If I'm going to do a newsletter, right, which can be 800 to 1,500 to 2,000 words, I'm not using ChatGPT. I'm using Claude.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so if somebody wanted to get an engine set up, they can, it sounds like, it sounds like they can kind of try to set one up on their own.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you have a playbook for how you could set up a context engine for folks. And once you set up a context engine for some folks, I guess how long does it take? Is that a few days, few hours, few weeks?
For people who are senior level and at the executive level who have a lot of content, especially, it actually doesn't take as long. I like to think, I can get it, if I'm working with somebody and have enough content to play with, it can be set up and running within a week or less. And then you go back and forth, and there's, I'm consultative through the whole process. So after a month, it's probably optimized and, kind of the way that, and putting out content the way that you need it to be put out. What I'm doing is it's not an easy transfer. It's not like, okay, I've built the engine for you, here you go. Yeah. Either I have to manage it moving forward, or I can train you to be AI savvy enough and then give you the step-by-step instructions to build it for yourself. So both of those things are possible.
Right.
But my next phase in the foreseeable future, I hope to create more of a package, like an app or dare I say an agent that can do this. But for now, it's really all about setting this thing up. And it's really my version or the way that I do this is extremely extensive because of the prompting. And because of, I'm bringing 25 years of understanding of what executive positioning is and how to build out narratives.
Yeah.
So it does add a deeper level of precision and kind of, I guess, relevance to your audiences. But like you can call that, you can call that whatever. Like I was going to kind of pat myself on the back and say, you can call that the gold standard, but that's, I'm not that full of myself, but you can call that like a supreme version. I like to say that somebody was asking me about this the other day. They created essentially a bot for themselves, like with their knowledge and sort of something that can write things in their voice. Did it on ChatGPT and then compared what they were doing to the one that I built for them.
Yeah.
Using my system in Claude. And it was like, oh, okay, this is for my bike ride around their own GPT was like, okay, this is for when I want to bike ride around town. Yours is for when I want to hop on my Harley and tour the country. Yeah. So it's like, it's a little bit of a different, different level.
I mean, you said it yourself, right? So if I were just to do this myself, and I know very little about AI, but I have access to, some of my content, I could piece my content together, maybe go in and figure out how to create custom GPT or something like that. And it can start to write in my style, perhaps with a little bit of my own, it can write with my own knowledge or my own perspective. But it sounds like the thing that you're bringing to the table, among other things, with this playbook is your deep domain expertise in the different kinds of patterns of writing, how to write, what is useful for what situation, how to
exactly.
So it's the content, the knowledge, the style, the voice, but also the communications domain expertise. When you couple all that together, it can produce something that is much more compelling. That's what it sounds like.
That's right. And there's one more layer that I would add to that, which is prompt engineering. I mean, it's like the depth, the frameworks and IP that I've developed over the last couple of years have really come to this place now where, like I said, it's complex, not for everybody, but I can do it for anybody.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that anyone who is in the space that I'm in that's AI savvy could figure out how to do this. But I've done it for you. It took a long time to get to the prompts that I'm at and to develop the frameworks that I have. So that's where a lot of the value is.
And Dan, I mean, maybe synonymously, or instead of content engine, is this effectively a PR agent that's AI driven that can craft messages on behalf of, let's say, a solopreneur or executive?
Of course.
Maybe the executive says, what would be the inputs to the engine? So the executive says, I want a LinkedIn post, right? Create a LinkedIn post for me. What other inputs would they provide that would provide some sort of output? And what would that look like using this, your agent or engine?
Well, assuming the engine's been built, right? And now that I've taken to calling it the executive influence engine, because I think you're right. It's not just about content, it's about influence. And influence is a product of building your reputation and trust.
Yeah.
And gaining attention. So once the thing is built, it has your knowledge in it, or a lot of your knowledge in it, and you constantly update and change and add your new points of view and tweak and everything like that. But once it's there, the single query, like let's take your example, I want to write a LinkedIn post. All I need to tell it is write a LinkedIn post about XYZ, and it will automatically create the LinkedIn post in the voice of that person. Because it's already set up that way. Where I found the best use cases for this are in like, for example, reactions or synthesizing articles or other people's work that's out there that the executive wants to kind of chime in on. So, in the comms world, PR, one of the PR tactics that you hear, or comms tactics you hear, something called, David Meerman Scott called it newsjacking like 25 years ago. But the idea is like you want to get onto topics that are hot right now.
Yeah.
So if your topic is recruitment, right, there's a lot of stuff going on out there about recruitment. So you find a new report from Korn Ferry, for example, and as a leader in the field, you probably want to chime in on that. You probably want to talk about that report. You probably want to offer your own expertise about saying, okay, where's this right and where's it wrong?
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, that meant you have to read the report, you have to do some research, and you have to kind of take notes. Now what you do is you take that report, you upload it. That's the input that you would use as you use the engine. And then I would say, for example, here's a report from Korn Ferry, looking at your body of knowledge and your point of view, give me a reaction to this report as a LinkedIn post. Then I might say, examine this report carefully, analyze it, and give me a neutral reaction explaining where this report is right and where in your opinion it is wrong, right? And then I might say, give me a really provocative byline article that's going to trash this report.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Something like that. And if, it will do all of these things in your voice in a way that makes sense to you. Now, if you're not a provocative person, then I would never ask it to do that. But, you could do anything just with that one piece of content.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's amazing. So like, people that might be like, again, that executive that wants to create a LinkedIn post, they might not even know what's the term you use? Newsjacking?
Yeah. Then nobody really, I don't think many people really use that anymore either.
They might not even know about that tactic. Right. And so with your engine, is a lot of these different tactics sort of embedded in the engine, or would that require some of your consulting to kind of create?
Well, it's not necessarily that it's embedded. The ability to write in such a way is embedded in.
Okay.
But you do need to prompt it, right? And you just don't have to, once it's all set up, you don't have to be a prompt engineer to prompt it. You could just ask it questions like you're a person. Okay. But it does help to know, my domain expertise, for example, tells me or allows me to say, oh, this article would be great for a reaction or for a reactive POV. And a reactive POV is a point of view article, expressing the executive's point of view. Most of the folks out there listening, small business owners, they're not going to even think about using POV. Yeah. And I get that. But maybe they'll get into the engine and they'll say, I really want to react to this article. I have these thoughts, and et cetera. That's going to be enough too. But yes, it is very helpful to have somebody. That's why, if I'm managing the process, it's a consultative service. Yeah. And, I'm adding that in. I do also provide, if it depends on the person and what their needs are, but I do also provide like a basic set of prompt templates that will hit a lot of these content. A lot of these different types of content, like a LinkedIn post template, a prompt template. Just cut and paste this in and go. Yeah. I'm of two minds about that. I think people need to be more natural the way that they talk with the AI, but at the same time, especially if you're in corporate, you're a comms team, you have an executive that you're taking care of, you're going to need to have a LinkedIn post, an article, and a short video or something about a particular topic. You're creating 4 or 5 different pieces of content for one specific thing, and I'm sorry to say that's where agencies make and have made quite a bit of money. You can cut that dramatically with something like this, where you can you can generate at least half of these things. You can create the video script and then go off and do the video.
Yeah. That was my next question, actually, Dan. How far off is video creation through an engine like this? Because it sounds like mostly right now it's text.
Well, so avatars are possible now. Of course, people are making their own AI avatars, and it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility, even right now, to create a video script and plug it into, let's say, 11 Labs or one of the voice generators. Generate a voice track and then use HeyGen to build a video for an executive. Those are all separate processes, so it's totally doable right now. But I don't think it's not like realistic yet. It's still clearly AI. It's there's still the uncanny valley. So we're not ready for it yet. When the answer is that when Claude or ChatGPT really add video creation to that point, then this could do it pretty easily. But I don't know if we're going to get there, or if my version is ever going to get there.
Yeah.
It's more like for the writing part and for the ideation part, So like it'll create video scripts. The other day I use it for myself. I have my own content engine. The other day I had it, I was analyzing a recent podcast transcript and pulling together some content. And then I thought about an article that I wanted to do. And I said, okay, what kind of images do you think it should have? And you can go to ChatGPT or something and get the same answers. But because it's my content engine, it sort of has me in mind. So then it suggested different image prompts for me, which are closer to the kind of things that I like to use, Yeah. That's about as far as I'll go in multimedia, multimodal, with this right now. It's more about just written content.
Okay, awesome. Well, this is really amazing stuff. It sounds like you've built a platform and it's evolving and it's growing, but it's basically encapsulating a ton of your years of experience working in communications and PR. And it's something that other folks, coupled with their own IP, their own knowledge, their own writing samples, smashing that together within this engine, they can take advantage of your expertise in a way that can scale, right? It sounds like it still requires a little bit of consulting on your part to kind of guide them.
Yeah. It's a product and a service at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it depends on how AI savvy the subject is.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, we're talking about people who don't have a lot of time. And that's where I come in to be that consultative force. Yeah. And clearly, if I'm doing this as a product and consulting on it at the same time, it's not super scalable for me. So I have a limited number of clients that I can take on at one time.
Yeah.
But I will be training up people to do this with me and expanding my company accordingly, assuming that, that this takes off.
Yeah. Awesome. So exciting, Dan. Thank you for sharing all this with me. How can the audience connect with you and learn more about your content engine and your services? And
well, I definitely encourage anybody to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Of course, you can find me, Daniel Nestle, on LinkedIn. My website is Inquisitive Communication, and it is be-inquisitive.com. That's be-inquisitive.com. It's about to be renewed. Probably by the time you hear this, it'll be the flashy new version of my website. You can find me at trendingcommunicator.com. That's my podcast website. Those are probably the main things. So LinkedIn, my website, and the podcast, trendingcommunicator.com. Oh, and my Substack, which is also Trending Communicator.
Awesome. We'll put those in the show notes as well, Dan.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your time today, Dan. Appreciate you. And thank you for everyone out there listening.
It's been a real pleasure, Eric. Thanks for having me on.